Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. With a week to go until Thanksgiving, we're going to show you where your food comes from and what life is like on a turkey farm leading up to the big day. Stonewood Farm is a family-owned business in Addison County that's been raising turkeys for over 30 years. The majority of their work centers on Thanksgiving, but Stonewood is a year-round agricultural business that produces and sells ground turkey, boneless breasts, and turkey sausage. Across the fences, Keith Silva trotted down to Orwell and filed this report.
At Stonewood Farm in Orwell, it's always time to talk turkey.
We have 37,000 turkeys on 800 acres. We have 7 barns for the turkeys. Basically, it's about 5,000 per barn. We have some Christmas turkeys to do, and then we'll have a few bigger turkeys for making our ground turkey and sausage. So probably by the second week of December, it'll all be gone.
Across the Fence first visited Stonewood Farm in 2011. There were only 27,000 turkeys here at that time, but even back then, Stone was glad when Thanksgiving arrived.
Getting everything slaughtered and getting everything delivered and getting it delivered to where it needs to be and what they order and what they want and everything is, it takes a lot of work to do that.
Stonewood Farm is Vermont's largest turkey farm. According to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, Vermont is home to more than a dozen turkey farms. There are 250 million farms nationwide that raise around 230 million turkeys. Before these birds end up on Thanksgiving tables, most have been raised here starting in July, and some as early as April.
And everything's based off of Thanksgiving. So we buy a turkey based on when Thanksgiving's going to be and how many weeks, and then we have 2 different breeds. We have what they call a mini, so the hens will only get up to 13, 14 pounds. They basically stop growing after that. And then the toms of the minis, they'll get up to 20-some pounds. We grow them longer than a lot of, big commercial ones. We don't feed any added fat or anything. We just have a balanced diet for them, and they take longer to grow. They just walk around the barns and eat and drink.
By Halloween, Stonewood Farm becomes a turkey processing powerhouse.
We're slaughtering turkeys now, so that takes about 28 people up there to do that. And that's roughly a 12-hour day.
Stonewood Farm sells fresh, not frozen, Thanksgiving turkeys. Going cold turkey here depends on time and temperature.
It's 4 weeks. People are going to wonder, well, how do you keep a turkey good for 4 weeks? Our cooler's a lot colder than your refrigerator. So they don't freeze, but they're a lot colder. They're still soft. And that's the only way we can do it. We can't, do it a week before Thanksgiving or that day.
Turkeys may turn out to be rare birds on many Thanksgiving tables this year due to avian flu and supply chain issues. The USDA reports that avian flu has killed 6 million turkeys. Vermont has been spared from avian flu, and even though other input costs have increased, Stone is encouraged about this year's sales.
Cost of grain went way up. Grain and labor are the 2 biggest costs that have gone up. Obviously, diesel fuel for the tractors to do stuff. Our sales are going to be good. I do know because of avian flu, we sold a lot more boneless breasts than we had. We had places buying boneless breasts that didn't normally do it.
What's the price of turkey this year?
Here at the farm, it's $4.59 a pound.
Thanksgiving is the literal and figurative cutoff date for Stone's business. And once the hay's in the barn, as the saying goes, Stone knows it won't be long before next year's turkeys start flocking to the farm.
I'm tired of turkeys after Thanksgiving. When Thanksgiving's over and they're all either sold or in the cooler or freezer, it's a nice feeling that you have a few months before we start getting poults again.
At Stonewood Farm, there's only one key to a successful Thanksgiving. I'll let you figure that one out on your own. In Orwell, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
The tradition of a United States president pardoning a turkey at Thanksgiving is thought to have started with Abraham Lincoln. Here in Vermont, the word pardon and Lincoln have a different connection, as we'll find out from Vermont historian Howard Coffin. It's a story about a private, a president, and perhaps the most famous pardon in Civil War history.
Here east of Groton along Route 302 stands a monument to a man who was probably the most famous private in all the Civil War, William Scott. A member of the 3rd Vermont Regiment, he was 18 when he went off to war. Early on, the regiment was stationed outside Washington in Georgetown. He was on sentry duty, and they found him asleep. He was court-martialed for that, and he pleaded not guilty, but still, after deliberations, the court-martial sentenced him to death by firing squad. They brought him out a few days later with the regiment assembled, tied him to a post, and he expected to hear his death warrant read. He was ashen-faced and trembling when he heard the words that he had been pardoned. He became known as the Sleeping Sentinel, and he went back to duty. Abraham Lincoln was aware of his case. Appeals had been made to Lincoln to spare his life. Looking back at it all, and looking at some sources like Wheelock Vasey, who was on the court-martial, it now seems there was a plot afoot to scare the daylights out of Union privates early in the war by almost killing one of them. Apparently it worked. Just south of St. Johnsbury, along the Passumpsic River, down here where Interstates 91 and 93 now meet, that level area was once the St. Johnsbury Fairgrounds. To the fairgrounds in the summer of 1861 came 1,000 Vermont men to drill and form the 3rd Vermont Regiment. One of those men was William Scott. This marker is right in the middle of the fairgrounds, which was renamed Camp Baxter when the soldiers got here. Here they drilled, and here William Scott became a soldier. A friend of his said he was a big, awkward country boy whose heart was as big as he was. He had trouble learning to march, kept kicking the foot of the man in front of him. Days later, 10,000 people gathered here to see the women of St. Johnsbury present a homemade flag to the regiment. Governor Erastus Fairbanks spoke. And then a few days after that, the regiment marched down the road to St. Johnsbury on their way to war. Down this road they came, which was lined with people, the 3rd Vermont, William Scott doing the best he could to keep in step. At the depot, a huge crowd was gathered, most cheering, some weeping, as the regiment boarded the train for Washington, D.C. and the war zone. The sparing of the Sleeping Sentinel's life was big news. It was in all the newspapers. Scott was briefly famous. The winter passed in camp. Scott rode home to Groton about how he wished he could be home and how he'd like some maple sugar. Then war began. George Brinton McClellan took his Army of the Potomac down the Virginia Peninsula and began to move against Richmond. But lo and behold, the Army came upon the Warwick River, which didn't show on their maps. It looked much like this orange pond. About this wide, it had been dammed by the Confederates, and on the far side, the Confederates had constructed earthworks, formidable earthworks and rifle pits. On the 16th of April, General McClellan came along and ordered the Vermonters to wade across that pond and attack those earthworks. The 3rd Vermont were the first to go, and as they waded into the water, William Scott was riddled with bullets. But they kept on across the pond, captured the earthworks, and held them until driven away by a Confederate counterattack. By the end of the day, 148 Vermonters had been shot. 65 of them would die. The war had really begun for Vermont. Vermont learned what war was all about. So the Vermonters had seen their first real heavy combat. Soon would come Savage's Station and bigger casualties. And down the road, of course, was Gettysburg and Wilderness and Cedar Creek and finally Petersburg and Appomattox. And the final cost would be some 6,000 Vermont lives. Right smack in the middle of Groton is the town Civil War monument with an astonishing number of names of local lads who served in the Civil War. The Scott boys' names are on here. At the time of the Civil War, there was a store here. Local people gathered here to get the latest war news. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Scott took the buckboard 4 miles down to get that news night after night. Was it here that he learned of William's death? Maybe Carl Sandburg said it best. William Scott, among the fresh growths and blooms of a Virginia springtime at Lee's Mills, took the burning messages of 6 bullets into his body. All he could give Lincoln or his country or his God was now given. Civil War combat had begun for the Vermonters.
Thank you, Howard. And once again, thank you for joining us. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.